Hello, friends. We're back on a slightly somewhat normal schedule at the moment, which is kind of crazy. Meaning that we can actually talk about stuff when it's actually happening. Um, and I wasn't feeling the best for the past hour or so I wasn't sure if this was going to happen as soon as it is, but I am feeling a lot better. So I said, you know what the hell? Let's try and do this video about as live as we can do it, right? So basically, what I have in another tab is the new Spells premiere video paused. And I believe that allows me to just continue playing it without having to watch it at the speed at which they're premiering it. So we're going to find out in just a sec. But this one, unless they drop some real big bombs, is going to probably be a pretty positive video, I assume, right? Like, unless we hear about some pretty massive nerfs to existing spells, where you find out that, like, a spell that you really like just gets its damage tanked into the dirt, or a spell that was a bonus action now becomes an action, or a spell that wasn't concentration now becomes concentration. Those are the kind of things that are going to make people upset. But otherwise, I feel like this will be a generally overall very positive video, right? I imagine you're not going to see a lot of massive changes in the spells. They might even talk about some new spells or spells that were debuted within the Unearthed Arcana that have now kind of graduated officially to the final printed PHB version. But yeah, for the most part, I have to imagine that spells are just going to be solid, right? Like it should be a good overall video. So yeah, I mean, because of the fact that we're probably not gonna. I realize that doing it simultaneously without having like planned, that this live stream was going to happen significantly earlier, is a little bit of a detriment. Um, No, all wizards, I believe, or all spellcasters can ritual cast now. Wizards only have that special bit that says that they can because it's like the ritual adept feature. Thank you, Avery. I am in fact recovering from night shifts and the ranger video. Yeah, so we're doing okay for the moment. But let's go ahead and no, I think we can actually, because we're gonna see Geostellar, but I think because I paused the premiere, I think I can just pick up where I paused it from. We're gonna find out. Let's find out. If not, we'll just chat until the premiere is done. How about that? That's not what you guys want to watch. That's you guys. We want to put you guys over here. Let's go ahead and see. We're gonna have to just hide the chat because it's gonna just be an absolute nightmare on their end. Oh no, looks like I can rewind it too. So I believe I have it paused. So we should be able to just jump right in here. So let's go ahead. You know what? All right, why prolong it any longer than it needs to be? Why don't we go ahead and dive in and start watching the video? Because obviously we're going to have commentary on this, and we're going to end up pausing the video at several points to discuss various things. So let's go ahead and do that. So switch over here. Let's see. Desktop capture. Here it is. All right. So we'll just go back a little bit. And let's go ahead. Let's turn on our subtitles. Now, interesting. We always increase our playback speed. We've been doing it. Many of you complained about 1.5 times speed being too fast. So we're going to go to 1.25, which will be interesting because we might catch up to live this way. So let's go ahead and see.
There are a lot of spells, there are new spells, and there's been some upgrades as well. This spell chapter is massive. It has even more spells than the spell chapter of the 2014 Player's Handbook.
Which is good.
It has at least 30 more spells than that chapter had. And all of the returning spells have...
Just want to point out that we've seen some of these in the form of all of their like redo of the Conjure spells and stuff like that.
Been revisited, and in some cases have received functional upgrades that deal more damage now, or they heal more if they're a healing spell,
Yeah, we
or
saw that.
the range has been extended, or a spell that required concentration before no longer does, or it didn't require concentration but it does now.
You know which spell that is. I know what spell that is for sure. It's going to make a lot of people upset. Maybe they'll talk about it. I don't want to break any kind of stuff. I will tell you, in preparation for this video, I did flip through the copy of the PHB I have and basically read through all of the spells. And there were some really interesting changes to some spells. A couple of spells that I didn't even recognize were brand new, like a brand new spell I found last night that I was like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't recognize that some of these had... There are instances of that, right? Where they're saying like spells that weren't concentration now are, spells that are maybe are not. There even is some pretty cool instances of things shifting to bonus actions from actions previously, which is like a major change and ridiculous quality of life improvement for some of those spells. So I hope they touch on that in this video.
There is a ton going on in this chapter. We have also gone through all of the spells to see how we can improve how easy it is to use them in play. We, based on a decade of questions about various spells, have essentially...
Once again, the art of the spells being cast is phenomenal. I believe this is Cone of Cold that we're seeing from the perspective of somebody having Cone of Cold cast at them.
Essentially embedded the answers to the most common rules questions about the spells into the spells themselves. So I think also people will find that even if a spell's functionality hasn't changed, that it will be easier for them to use because their most frequently asked questions are now answered in the spell itself.
Right.
There's also more art of the spells than before.
Art. Yeah, that's been amazing.
So you're going to get to see more
splash
of the spells in use.
Literal acid
and a lot of the spells have been tightened up. One of the things we did is in some cases, the spells do more but with fewer words. And we were on the hunt to see how many words can we squeeze out of some of these so that you can get to the meat of the spell faster. We wanted you to be able to, when going through this massive chapter, not only find the spell that you want to cast easily.
Yeah, that did look like Guardian of Faith. Also, I saw the question about Percy Jackson as a fighter / sea druid. Honestly, you could probably do a lot of Percy Jackson with just the sea druid and not even really need the levels in fighter, especially with the opportunity to do like more damage with a weapon attack and stuff. But you know, it's hard to say because Percy's kind of he's still a kid, so.
But then when you're reading it, get to the heart of what that spell does without too much fuss. We've also upgraded the presentation of the spells by including in the spells themselves a list of the classes that have a particular spell on their list. So, for example, if a spell is a wizard spell, its description tells you that it's a wizard spell.
Yeah.
This is going to make spell selection way easier because you no longer are going to have to flip back and forth between a spell list elsewhere in the book and the spells themselves when you're trying to figure out what spells you want your paladin or your ranger or your wizard or your warlock or what have you. When you're making your spell selection, you can just look through the spell chapter and you can see right up there near the spell's name, this is a sorcerer spell or this is a wizard spell.
Instead of having to dig.
It doesn't in my and I'd have to double check it, but when I was doing the reading through and checking the spells last night, I do not believe that it lists out if it's like a specific like it's not going to say like cleric. It might like say, cleric, druid, wizard, but then it's not going to say like paladin parentheses ancients. Like it doesn't have subclasses or classes with expanded spell lists. It's just the base set of spells, unfortunately, which obviously could prove just like a little bit more digging. But the fact that it existed, like that blew my mind because I, again, was very used to third edition where the spell chapter told you what classes and things had access. It also told you like domains and stuff like that, who had access to those spells when you would look at the spell description. And the fact that in 2014 I had to flip back to the spell list page and then like look down, okay, is that a wizard spell? Yes, and then flip through that to find that spell was just annoying. So while this isn't 100% perfect, and again, some of this will probably be fixed depending on the character creator or virtual tabletop or whatever you might be using for your game, D&D Beyond does a great job of that because it tags all of the spells at the bottom of the page with like cleric, paladin, and then they'll say like, the specific subclass. But either way, what it is currently is leaps and bounds better than what it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we also have taken the ritual tag and we have moved it out of that line underneath the spell's name, and it is now on the casting time line because the ritual tag primarily affects the casting time of a spell. We did that not only so that you can spot that immediately when you're looking at how long it takes to cast a particular spell to see if you have the option of casting it as a ritual, but also because we were putting more information up on that line higher up in the spell. We needed to get the ritual tag out of there.
Yeah.
Presentation improved.
So what this means is like, say, detect magic, right? Now, normally you could cast detect magic as an action, right? Typically. And it also had the ritual tag. Basically, what it says now under casting time for something like detect magic says action or ritual. So if something has like a Leoman's tiny hut and it's like a minute or a ritual or whatever it might be, it'll say minute or ritual. So that you're just going to be extending the time, but without expending the spell slot.
The clarity of the spells improved. Functionality improved. Many spells have been buffed. There are also, in particular, a number of high-level...
I don't know if I could tell you what that spell is without giving it away, but that's a really cool increased functionality to an existing spell.
Damaging spells that have had their damage increased.
Love the art
so
here.
that people will feel good about using them.
Also, they're really
Strike
showcasing
now
just all
deals
the
more
art.
damage, as do, and again, a number of other higher level spells.
I think they just added a couple D6s to Flame Strike. I think they just bumped up the damage for each set of damage by a D6 or something, possibly.
There are new ways to use spells and then brand new spells. Would you like to hear about some of those?
I would love to
Yes,
hear about
let's
those.
talk about some of the new ones.
A number of the new spells, some of them people saw versions of them as a part of the Unearthed Arcana process. And also some of the new spells originally showed up in books like Xanathar's Guide or Tasha's Cauldron. But even spells that appeared in those...
This is a new spell with new art. By the way, I just want to point this out too for folks. I do actually have a video that I've recorded and it's already uploaded. I just haven't put it out yet, where I'm kind of going through all the things that will not be, to some extent, that will not be in the player's handbook. So I did like the first video that isn't out yet is like all of the subclasses that will not be in the player's handbook. I know we kind of did the opposite side by talking about all of the subclasses that will be in the player's handbook, but I just wanted to kind of call attention to all of the subclasses that do exist that are out there that have the potential to possibly be updated in a future source book, or at the very least homebrew updated by me in future videos. I will tell you that even though he's kind of mentioning it now, there are several spells, specifically a lot of the cantrips too, that were in Xanathar's Guide or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that transitioned into the player's handbook version that we're going to see now. It is, I will tell you with 100% certainty, not all of the spells. So not every spell from Xanathar's Guide and Tasha's Cauldron made its way into the 2024 player's handbook. Right? I don't think you're actually losing any spells. Like you're not like any of the spells that were in the 2014 player's handbook. I don't think they cut any of those. I think you're getting all of those back. Again, some tweaked and updated, and then adding additional from those other books, but it is not every single spell.
Those books first that now are new spells in the player's handbook have often seen upgrades either in functionality or in clarity or both. One whole group of spells that are new to the player's handbook are summoning spells. And we took the summoning spells that were very popular from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, imported those into the player's handbook, and then upgraded them.
Yeah, there's even more options now, and this is one of my favorite things when it comes to the spells, because it's just immediate. These have stat blocks in them. You don't have to go hunting through the monster manual. You have everything you need within that spell, and there are options within that spell.
And those stat blocks now also have the upgraded stat block format that appears not only in this book's creature appendix, but also in these spells. And so these monsters are going to be easy to use at the table. Most of these summoning spells also now have art. So people will get to see at least some of the versions of critters that you can summon.
This is like Summon Fae, maybe?
And I think these are going to be a ton of fun for people to use at the table.
You know, you can summon a construct, you can summon dragons, you can summon undead. So you virtually any.
There's basically a summon spell for every type of creature, I believe. Right? And he kind of just went through a couple of those, right? Beast, Fae, Fiend, Undead, Dragon. I don't know if there's a Summon Ooze, which would be a really sad thing if you just didn't have Summon Ooze in there.
Anything you would want to summon, and they come with a stat block in that spell.
Yes. And, you know, beasts, Fae, it goes on and on. Now, because we included these summoning spells, we ended up redesigning the Conjure spells that were in the 2014 Player's Handbook.
Right.
This was definitely an Unearthed Arcana, if you recall. They changed all of those Conjure spells. And I still stand by what I said when I made that original video, that I didn't particularly love the Conjure updated spells, because, like, they kept the spells with the same names because those spells existed, but what they do is drastically different. Like, Conjure, like, some of them are more, like, pretty close, it seems like Conjure Barrage and those spells. But what they mean is, like, you used to have Conjure Animals, right? And everybody knows that Conjure Woodland Beings, but Conjure Animals, the one big move was you would always, like, go for a bunch of giant constrictor snakes because they could restrain enemies. But if you technically read the spell, it didn't let you pick the type of creature. It was basically like the DM has the stat blocks. And they changed a lot of those spells, and I'm sure he's going to talk about it. It was in one of the Unearthed Arcanas. They shifted them to basically be like they do damage or some other thing. And it just, like, it felt like we're keeping the name for the purposes of keeping the name, when the spell you basically just designed is a cool brand new spell. But, like, what it reminds me of is, like, when people will talk about how, like, they'll go see, like, a sequel or a new entry in a series, a beloved series of theirs, and they're like, I don't know what this is, but if it was a standalone movie not tied to the original property, or standalone piece of content not tied to the original property, this would be amazing and I would love it. But because it's part of this existing continuity, like, that brings it down. And that's kind of how I feel about these spells. The spells themselves are very, very cool, but just calling it Conjure Animals just feels like you're just like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just nitpicking. It's just, so, you know, we'll pull up, we'll keep going, but we'll pull up that Unearthed Arcana and look through those again so I can kind of talk about what I'm mentioning here.
because in the 2014 Player's Handbook, we had, spells like Conjure Fey, Conjure Celestial, that sort of thing. And those versions had you fishing for stat blocks in the monster manual, and also, unfortunately, often resulted in a whole bunch of creatures showing up on the battlefield.
Taking up initiative.
Yeah, and they really tended to bog down play.
Yeah.
They were often a headache for dungeon masters. And so what we did, because this new summoning spells really fill the design niche of bringing a concrete creature onto the battlefield with a stat block, we redesigned all the conjuration spells that were like, again, conjure woodland beings, that kind of thing, so that they were really leaning into not the notion of bringing a concrete creature, but instead summoning these spirits of these creatures that help you in some way. So all of those spells have been redesigned, and people got to see those redesigns in the UA process and gave essentially thumbs up across the board. And so people will get to see the final versions of those revised Conjure spells.
I still love this Druid art,
in
by
the
the
new
way.
Player's Handbook. In addition to the new summoning spells, the redesigned Conjure spells, all of these other buffed spells, we also have some spells that we brought in and revised in support of some of our subclass design. Here's one example.
Here we go.
The spell chapter now has the Dragon's Breath spell, which has appeared in 5th edition before, and we brought that in because we wanted to give it to the Draconic Sorcerer.
Of course.
Makes sense.
And so there are a number of spells that have been added that are directly in support of classes and subclasses in the book. Another example of that is the new Elementalism cantrip, which we designed not only to support the Warrior of the Elements in the Monk, but also as an answer to the various elemental cantrips that we have published at different times in 5th edition. And we pondered bringing all of those cantrips into the Player's Handbook, but instead we decided to just design one cantrip that allows you to tap into the different elements to, create different elemental shapes and whatnot. We also
What he's referring to about these elemental kind of things is like mold earth, shape water, gust, and control flames. All of those spells, those cantrips were like individual, like locked into a specific element, and it's such a cleaner design to just make the elementalism cantrip, and that just basically does the functionality of all of those things, except it's just one cantrip and it just lets you pick, and it's so much nicer. I like that a lot.
Also have fun things like Steel Wind Strike that people have really enjoyed for the Ranger, now a part of the core game. And also spells that people have never seen before, not even in Unearthed Arcana. And these spells, a number of them are connected to named spellcasters in the D&D multiverse. We've already talked about in one of the videos Yolan's Regal Presence as one of these new spells, but we also have Jolarzi's Storm of Radiance. Jolarzi is one of the Circle of Eight, that same organization of wizards that Mordenkainen and Bigby are parts of, and she now has one of her named spells here in this book. It was also fun to include Jolarzi, not only because we could get one of her spells into the book, she also appears in art, and also
her art is really cool, and I'm loving her. Like, it doesn't even really look like a pseudo dragon like familiar. It looks like a straight up dragon familiar, which is like really cool. I like that a lot.
This will be of interest to you, Todd, as a lover of warlocks. Jolarzi is also notable in the Circle of Eight because she is a warlock, not a wizard, and she is specifically a celestial warlock.
Oh, boo!
and her spell is all about channeling this this radiant power.
I didn't mean to boo Celestial Warlocks.
Celestial Warlock is awesome. We also have a brand new spell associated with Tasha. We have Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron.
Yeah.
I want to like this spell, but it's not. At least I'm not finding the huge benefits of it. But he'll talk about it here.
A higher level spell that when you cast it summons up a big cauldron, and you can dip vials into it and get potions out of it.
Perfect.
So this will now be the fastest way to get potions is with Tasha's bubbling cauldron. There are also favorites that have migrated into the book, like Toll the Dead. That cantrip is now
Most
part of the core
cantrips
game.
made their way in.
Synaptic Static.
Yes.
Love that spell.
We also have new cantrips that people got to see in Unearthed Arcana, like Starry Wisp and Sorceress Burst. Those have made it into the core game.
Good options.
Mind
We like
Spike,
those.
Mind Sliver, Ice Knife,
Great
Vitriolic
spells.
Sphere, Word of Radiance. Those are among the spells that have now graduated to being in the game's main rulebook. We also, again, could probably talk for hours and won't about all of the spells that have had significant changes.
And there have been, right?
get,
Like,
like,
there's some
one,
have
'cause
had
some I wanna
significant
talk about,
improvements.
but-
Maybe it's like something to do with action economy or wasn't quite hitting that sweet spot. Do you have a few examples of that?
Yes,
Well,
please.
among my favorites are the improved healing spells.
So good.
Healing
Love this.
spells have been upgraded, Cure Wounds, Healing Word, and so many others, so that now if you decide to spend your bonus action or action healing, you're going to more often than not feel better about doing so than you did before.
No, healing is definitely improved.
We have some healing spells like Prayer of Healing that not only saw that sort of boost, but also now Prayer of Healing with its 10-minute cast lets people have the benefits of a short rest. Now you can only enjoy that benefit once per day. Still, that is a major upgrade for that spell. People are also going to see cantrips like Blade Ward, Resistance, Guidance, having either different functionality or better functionality or both. Guidance, for example, you now choose a particular skill when you cast Guidance on a person, and you then concentrate, and while you're maintaining your concentration, the person will get a bonus to any ability check they make with the chosen skill. We've made it so that
So no nerf to guidance. What they're saying, he just kind of touched on it there, is what they've done with guidance is it functions almost identically to its 2014 version. Arguably, it's almost a buff in some ways. So usually what you do when you cast guidance is I cast guidance on you, and you get a bonus 1d4 to the next saving throw you make, or the next ability check you make. So I would say I'm going to give you guidance. And normally in 2014, whatever the next ability check you make, it goes off on, right? Now, normally that's how that works. But I do feel like a lot of the time when you're casting guidance, it's in relation to a specific thing you're doing, right? Like, I'm going to try and pick this lock. All right, I'm going to cast guidance. Ideally, I'm casting guidance on you so that 1d4 that you're getting will be given to you to boost your sleight of hand check to pick that lock, right? What it is now is when you are casting guidance, you have to pick the skill. So instead of me just giving you a d4 on the next skill check, I say, hey, I'm going to cast guidance on you for stealth checks, let's say. And for the next minute, while I am concentrating on guidance, because guidance has always been a concentration spell, but previously the concentration would just end when it went off, right? You would cast the spell, and then once it was done, it would like pop off, and that would be it. So now if I say I cast guidance on you and I pick stealth checks, while I concentrate for that minute, every stealth check you make in that minute gets the d4. Now, that's probably not the best example, right? Because if you're stealthing, it's probably going to take longer than a minute. But if you are doing a series of lock-picking checks or searching around a room for something, and I say, hey, I'm going to choose perception, And now every perception check you make in the next minute has a D4 to it, which actually gives it, in theory, more usage. And it's a cantrip, right? So if I say I'm going to give you guidance on perception checks, and then like all of a sudden we get to a point where now you're going to have to make stealth checks, I can just cast it again as a stealth check, overriding my concentration on the previous one and re-upping it. So I actually like this version a little bit better. The only thing that it doesn't apply to, and this was kind of a niche thing that not all DMs would go for anyways, because technically initiative was, not sure if it technically is considered this now anymore, initiative was considered a ability check. Now this applies again specifically to skill checks, because initiative was a dexterity ability check and guidance gave you a D4 on ability checks. If I had given you guidance or had cast guidance upon myself before I got into a combat scenario, my initiative that D4 would apply to my initiative. Again, that is a very niche thing. I know some people that would be like, hey, DM, you know, some DMs would go for this, some wouldn't, but basically consider me always casting at the end of every minute guidance on myself every time unless I tell you otherwise. In that it means like that if we ever accidentally pop into a combat, I'm going to add a D4 to my initiative roll. So that's the only thing that it doesn't apply to now, but I do think the new version of guidance is definitely an improvement. No, it is not a reaction anymore. It is back to an action casting. So, like, again, a lot of you might remember and realize there's been iterations on a lot of these cantrips and different spells and stuff. Like, the things you might remember because it stood out when it was like guidance was a reaction, but only when you failed the thing and you could only use it once per long rest or whatever it was. That's gone. Guidance is almost exactly like it was in 2014. Let's see. Guidance, well, yes, but it's not anymore. That's what he's saying. Guidance is now, it's not a reaction anymore. It was in the one version. There was a couple different versions of guidance in the Unearthed Arcana. Did they change it? No, I can't remember. Like, there was the one version. I'm pretty sure there was another version that like they had adjusted at different points. There was definitely the one where it was a reaction, but I thought the reaction one, if I recall, was like you can only benefit from that guidance cantrip once per long rest, which obviously people didn't really like because you're giving me a cantrip that's unlimited use, but it has limited uses and how often I can activate it. So they've since foregone, I guess, that version of guidance is no longer, it didn't make its way into the final version, which again, something to consider, that stuff that we heard is not necessarily things that are finalized. Just because we saw it in Unearthed Arcana, they have done adjustments and tweaks since then. Yes, there is. They did make, I think it was like Gift of Alacrity or whatever. That was a critical role spell that added the D4 to initiative. It's specifically designed for that. Oh, you know what? Yes, was it UA Bastions and Cantrips where they changed it back? Because it was in a very early version. Remember, they also had Bark Skin was granting temporary hit points or something at one point. So they tried a couple of different things. Let's see. If Bastions and Cantrips, was that the one where they updated guidance back to being the same version as before? Let's see. Revised cantrips. Friends, Chill Touch. Oh, no, this isn't it. I thought this was where they did it, but no. This is where they updated a lot of the other things. Okay, yeah, I don't remember. Either way, it's, he's talking about it now, but...
Resistance and Blade Ward might actually see use in play, since those two cantrips have spent a whole lot of the last 10 years often not being used.
Yeah.
And that is something that was on our mind as we went through the spell list. It was not only seeing what spells are not delivering the power they should be delivering and making sure that they were, and in some very rare cases seeing which spells are over-delivering, but then also seeing what spells have seen very little use, particularly lower level spells, and what can we do to really just make them more enticing. Then on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to high level spells, we're less concerned about how often they're used, because high level spells are often much more
I believe this is Hero's Feast. There's the taco. The Hero's Feast taco.
circumstantial. It's also rarer for people to be at the level where they can cast those spells, but it was still important to us to make sure that those spells, when you do get to be high enough level to cast them, or if you're a dungeon master and you're having a monster cast those spells, we wanted to make sure that they were delivering the goods for their level. And we also made sure that those spells were as clear as possible, because some of those high-level spells are complex, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, when you finally get there and are able to cast those spells, you can actually decipher what the heck they're doing.
Right.
We also, in some families of spells, made sort of changes to the whole family. I already mentioned us making changes to the Conjure family of spells. Similarly, we've made changes to the shape-shifting family of spells. So when you get
Everybody's
to
favorite image,
polymorph, shape change, true polymorph, you're going to see that none of these spells give you anymore a second pool of hit points. They now do something that actually I talked publicly about years ago, where I shared publicly that I wished we had made those spells give you temporary hit points. And so now that is indeed what they do. So rather than you essentially having two different hit point pools, your own.
similar to what we saw with the Druid, things are all about temporary hit points.
Pool and the pool of the form that you have transformed into, you now keep your own hit points, and instead you get some temporary hit points based on the form that you are shapeshifting into. We have also standardized the wording that we use for some of our spells. So we use shapeshifting wording much more consistently for any spell that involves shapeshifting. We implement the new emanation area of effect.
Emanation is so nice. It's so much
We also
cleaner.
are much clearer about how we're using various conditions, damage types, and so forth. I think what people are going to see when they dig into this vast sea of spells is not only a whole lot of fun, some of it new or old.
Well, Wild Shape doesn't give an HP pool anymore anyway. Wild Shape gives temporary hit points. So it's kind of a similar thing.
Fun that has been enhanced, but they're also going to see that the entire collection is simply easier to deploy at the table, whether you are playing a player character or you're the dungeon master playing a spellcaster, because one of the things that is always important to remember about the spell chapter is, unlike, say, the class chapter, which is the biggest chapter in the player's handbook, the spell chapter, which is the second largest, isn't just for players.
Yeah.
The spell chapter is the repository of spells for the whole core game. And the dungeon master often needs that part of the player's handbook just as much as the players do. And so there are parts of that spell chapter that are primarily for the DM. A great example of that is a spell like Guards and Wards. It is extremely rare for a player character to ever cast Guards and Wards, but a dungeon master's NPC spellcaster might cast it to make their dungeon that much harder to infiltrate.
Well, we do have bastions now.
Yes.
In the Dungeon Master's Guide, so that might actually get a little bit more use in the future.
Exactly. But even a spell like Guards and Wards, we have fine-tuned in the new Player's Handbook. Wish has been fine-tuned. The wish spell now has some new default options built into it, and also the spell has more to say now about what the ramifications could be of you using the spell. And there is even in the spell now specific guidance on what happens should you try to use the spell to affect either the city of Sigil or the Lady of Pain. So please.
I love a Lady of Pain caveat.
Yes,
and a wish spell.
There is a specific Lady of Pain bit now in the wish spell. And many of the spells, even when they don't have much of a functional change, sometimes have a fun bit of flavor change, whether it's the bit about the Lady of Pain in the wish spell, or it's new details in.
No, it's just a standard spell section. They're just saying that spells, there are some like the spell section is useful to the players and the DMs. There's not a separated out spell section.
The component part of the spell, or new flourishes about what happens if the spell fails. So I look forward to people spending time with the new spell chapter and discovering the number of fun Easter eggs and winks and other things that we have planted throughout the chapter for people to enjoy over the years ahead, because we know the spell chapter is a chapter that people come back to over and over and over again. And so we like to make sure there are goodies for people to discover there. And we have a very similar approach to the magic item chapter of the Dungeon Master's Guide. We put in not only, the sort of the things people expect to find there, but also we like to put in fun little surprises.
Is there any other spell that really stands out to you that is like, oh, this is so much better? This is going to get used so much more.
Say it.
Two that right away, looking at the list, that I encourage people to look at to really see the kind of new fun that we've added are Chromatic Orb and Cloud of Daggers.
Yes.
I
was hopeful that we were going to get to these, and they mentioned them. Well, let's just see what he says. But yes, these are phenomenal updates.
I'll start with Chromatic Orb. In that spell, it still lets you choose damage type.
Well, remember I was saying I wish I could tell you what spell this was? Well, now I can, because this is art for Chromatic Orb.
Like you could before.
Right.
But notice what's happening.
The thing that we added in is now the orb can bounce. And so now it can potentially bounce from one target to another. So that's what I mean, that this chapter is filled with sort of new little bits of fun that we've worked into various spells. Similarly, in Cloud of Daggers.
Basically, its functions very similar to the Warlock or the Sorcerer spell Chaos Bolt Chromatic Orb. And I can't remember, they may have removed Chaos Bolt from the book entirely in favor of just adding Chaos Bolt's functionality to Chromatic Orb. But now it just makes it more widely usable.
This spell now lets you move it. I, as a player, when I have cast Cloud of Daggers, that is often my main frustration with it, is I cast it, and then the monsters move over there.
Yeah.
Or even when I cast Cloud of Daggers in Baldur's Gate 3, I, as a player, I'm like, I want to be able to move it. So when we got to finalizing the spell chapter, we made it so you can now move Cloud of Daggers. We've also made it so that some spells that were really painful to cast in terms of their action economy are far less painful. I think one of the prime examples of that is Produce Flame, the Druid cantrip. That cantrip was really painful to set up. Like, once you got it going, it could be fun to hurl the fire. Now it is way easier to cast it. And that is actually, funnily enough, another one where it was not only painful to cast in the tabletop game, but when I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, it was excruciating to cast in Baldur's Gate 3. And it was actually while playing Baldur's Gate 3, I thought we are going to redesign Produce Flame so that
I don't
it
like
will
it in
not
Baldur's
be,
Gate,
there will
so
not be
I
this
get it.
much friction to cast this cantrip.
And the art is stunning. And this is one of my favorite things about the art that gives you an example, is because often you're showing, of course, the caster, the person who made this spell in the first place, casting the spell. Like Melf is casting Melf's Acid Arrow. As primarily a Warlock player, I'm super excited to see, Armor of Agathis, and also, Arms of Hadar, things like that shown that I've never seen really.
And those two spells are in the same painting.
Yeah, a lot of these paintings have two spells going off at the same time,
Yep.
and it's fantastic. You see, Everard's Black Tentacles being cast.
By Everard.
Yeah, by Everard. You see Fireball going off and burning a lot of spiders, and probably a lot of spiders on the periphery. And it's this stuff like that that I think helps set up players' imaginations.
Similarly, you'll be able to not only see Magic Missile being cast, but the wizard who's casting it has mage armor on.
Yeah.
And it's a rare case for us to actually show mage armor. A number of the paintings, in their captions, they'll identify the main spells that are being cast. But there are even a few cases where there are other spells in the image as well that we don't highlight in the caption.
There's a charming painting for scrying where one person is casting scrying to talk to their mom, and their mom is casting scrying to see them. So it's like FaceTime.
And that is specifically what I asked for. So with that image, when working with Emi Tanji, the art director, as well as Josh Herman on this book, I specifically said, I really want a scrying image where it's the wizard and his mom FaceTiming.
Yeah.
And that's what we got.
It's very charming. Every piece of art in this entire book is telling a story, and that's what I appreciate. Or it's a moment in the adventure, or right before combat, or after combat, or it's demonstrating something you always kind of wondered about. So I love seeing spell art anytime I can. And in the history of D&D, sometimes it's not been clear what that spell is in art.
Yes.
All the way back through the editions. Sometimes it's just a laser beam, but not defined. But now you're getting definition.
If we could have added another 32 pages to the book, we would have had even more art. But the book was already 384 pages, with more art than a player's handbook has ever had before.
Well, luckily we have a lot more books coming out after this too. So if you need more spell art, there might be more spell
Come
art
on.
in those.
Whoa. Hold on. Todrick, what are you saying here, my friend? That is some news there. Hang on.
Pages, with more art than a player's handbook has ever had before.
Well, luckily we have a lot more books coming out after this too. So if you need more spell art, there might be more spell art in those.
A lot more books coming out after this one. Now, obviously, we knew more books were coming, right? We know more books are going to be coming, but right now we don't know. We know through 2025 when the Monster Manual releases, but he specifically said more books are coming, so you might get more spell art. Now, that could just be haha, funny joke to end an interview video, but I wonder if there's a kernel of truth to that statement. Because that would be very cool if that was the case.
When you pre-order the digital physical bundle, you also...
All right, so... No, I know they were planning to continue releasing books. That was never a question. Obviously, they're going to do that. They've already talked about some things like the Venger-themed campaign, where Venger is one of the villains in it. Unless I'm pretty sure they mentioned that was going to be a 2025 campaign setting, was going to have Venger as the main villain. They announced that at PAX Unplugged last year, I believe. So there's definitely been, there are plans, obviously, for future books, but it's just we haven't heard anything about them. Usually we kind of get an idea, or maybe we get a tease. So right now we have Tales from the Infinite Staircase dropping, mid-July, I believe. And we have the Player's Handbook coming in September, the Dungeon Master's Guide coming in, I think, November, and then the Monster Manual dropping in February. But beyond the Monster Manual in February, we don't know anything on the horizon. Now, we might get something maybe in February or so of next year, Maybe we get another D&D Direct or some sort of situation where they kind of give us another roadmap of what's going on. Maybe they just drop it as a blog post. We don't really know. Maybe at Gen Con they'll make an announcement. Maybe at PAX Unplugged later this year they'll make a different announcement. Who knows? But right now we don't really have any concept of what the future holds beyond the release of these books. And honestly, the releases post these books are some of the most interesting, in my opinion, because right now we are in the process of revamping and revitalizing the rule set for 5th edition. So whatever this next source book that comes out, unless it's the book that I've talked about ad nauseum, my concept for a player's handbook 2, it should be, if it's not like recycling and rehashing feels like it has a negative connotation. So if it's not updating the older stuff that we no longer have access to because it wasn't updated into 2024, if it's not a book doing that, it'll be wholly new content. And we've been so steeped in this revitalization of the rule set for the past 2+ years. It's not to say that we haven't gotten new content in there, because we did, right? We got Fizz Bands and we got Bigby's Glory of the Giant. So we've gotten some new stuff. But like, we haven't really gotten, we knew that it was all culminating in the adjustments to the base classes and everything. And we also haven't had an Unearthed Arcana that wasn't tied to these rule set in 2 to 3 years at this point. So it would be crazy, because there's a potential that new Unearthed Arcana could drop in sometime in the near future, playtesting brand new, never before seen subclasses, or possibly again playtesting revitalized versions of older subclasses. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds beyond 2024 rules revitalization. All right, now we had talked about we were going to do a little discussion on the Conjure. Let's see. Let's see. All right, so we were talking about, let me pull up this video here, or this article. We were talking about the Conjure spells, because he mentioned that in the video. This is them, right, from this is Unearthed Arcana playtest number 8. You can see again, they basically adjusted all of the Conjure spells, because they basically adapted all of the summon spells, and therefore the Conjure spells were no longer necessary. And as I mentioned, I like these spells, but some of them just feel odd to just keep the name for the purposes of keeping the name. So here's Conjure Animals. You summon a nature spirit to take the form of a swarm of spectral animals. This probably will say something like, this is a range of 60 feet. This lasts for the duration. Choose this form of the swarm. When a creature enters a space within 10 feet of the swarm, for the first time it starts its turn there, you make a melee spell attack against the creature. On a hit, they take 2d10 radiant damage, and you have advantage on strength saving throws while you're within 10 feet of the swarm. Now, again, the swarm isn't necessarily emanating from you. That may have changed in the final version, but it's a spell you can drop. But calling it Conjure Animals feels silly, because it's like, it could be animals, but it's a swarm. So like, you could have just named this one Conjure Swarm or Nature Guardians or something like that, right? And same thing here, like Conjure Celestial, you summon the protective presence of a celestial spirit, which manifests as a pillar of divine light that shines. So you summon this pillar, and it's this pillar of light that you can move on your turn, and things happen when creatures are inside the cylinder. A creature that isn't undead or construct regains hit points, or a creature can take 8d12 radiant damage, depending on who it is and what you do. So this could have obviously just been called Celestial Spirit. We already have a spell called Dawn, so it doesn't really work like that. We already also have a spell called Sunbeam. But, there's different... Celestial Spirit sounds like it could be a cool name for it. I mean, Celestial Cylinder is a silly name, but you get my point. Like, we're just keeping the name because of the name. But some of these, like Conjure Woodland Beings, you summon nature spirits that flit about you. So this is a 10-foot emanation, right? When a creature enters the space, they must make a wisdom saving throw or take force damage. This is basically a higher level version of Spirit Guardians, except it's tied to nature spirits. So this one could maybe be called Nature Guardians. Then it's for druids and rangers. Do you see what I'm saying? So I like the spells. I really, truly do. And I think they are all interesting and unique little tweaks and things they've done. But just keeping the Conjure names just seems odd as just like a, we're just going to keep the names to keep the names. Again, you know, that's a small nitpick. I'm not like really that upset about it one way or another, but they did also make their way into the final version of the player's handbook. Fun fact, Chuvarova, you actually saw the daylight spell in that video. Let's see. Let's where is it? Here you go. Right here. This is daylight being cast. So, there you go. And if you'll notice that all of these creatures, you can see it right here, you can see it down here, they all have a certain sort of elongated set of fangs in the front of their mouth. This one over here in the corner that you can barely see kind of looks like a Starian. So they are all of a certain type of undead creature, and this spell is very clearly setting them all on fire. So take that from that what you will. Yes. So I'm really bummed because there's at least 2 spells that I know of from doing like reading through them last night that were action spells in 2014 that shifted to bonus action, and it's such a beautiful quality of life improvement, and they didn't mention them, which is kind of a bummer because it just, again, it adds such simple little changes and adds so much quality of life, which I really appreciate. But again, ultimately, in exactly 1 month from today, my embargo on the 2024 Player's Handbook lifts, and I will be able to post videos about the 2024 Player's Handbook, with the exceptions of certain pages that the embargo specifically states I can't show off things. I'm also not allowed to show art that they haven't publicly, like, put out there. So we'll have to do some creative editing on this stuff to like block out images of the pages and things that they haven't fully showcased yet. Or you'll just have to take my word for it one way or the other. But yeah, so yeah. I mean, it also, it's funny because the embargo lifts at when we're at Gen Con. So like I've got a couple of weeks here to just dump a ton of content on YouTube and schedule it. And when I say a ton of content, I want you all to realize I will basically be having a video come out like every 4 hours. Like while I'm at Gen Con, you're going to get a new video about the 2024 Player's Handbook about every 4 hours. So the only thing that I haven't decided is if I'm going to, like, if I were to say do a video on the Barbarian, right? Do I do a video on just the base Barbarian and then separate videos on all of the subclasses, or one big long video on the Barbarian that goes into covers the base Barbarian and then goes off into the individual subclasses? What would you guys prefer? Would you prefer like a video covering the base class of each class in like a standalone, and then the subclasses. So again, we know like it would be like 2024 Barbarian. That's the base class, and then a follow-up video that's Path of the World Tree, Path of the Zealot, Path of the Berserker, Path of the Wildheart, and then you get 5 Barbarian videos, because there would be 5 videos per each class that way, or we could just do one longer video that is like the Barbarian with timestamps. Okay, I am seeing a lot of back and forth on this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put out a YouTube tab, like community post, asking which one you'd prefer. And then we'll use that as the basis for what I do going forward. Because obviously there's going to be other videos besides just the classes, right? That is 12 videos for the classes. But there's obviously going to be a video on feats and a video on weapon mastery and a video on a variety of different spells and crafting rules and character creation and different conditions and, you know, adjustments to certain spells in and of themselves. Yeah. Anyway, that covers our video today discussing the spells in the 2024 Player's Handbook. I'm going to go get some lunch, and we'll be back tomorrow. I think it's crafting is tomorrow. So, anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.